this gets to be a topic now. Because we need to talk about socialization. We need to talk about how people on the internet lack social skills in a ton of situations. So what do I mean when I say that? I mean that you and I, existing on Twitter, what are we in the void of? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Well, there's this thing called the Society of Transparency, and that's what Twitter is. That's what YouTube is. That's what a lot of these social media platforms end up being. We reward transparency of content creators, of media personalities, of all of this stuff. And out in the real world, that shit doesn't happen. Nobody out in the real world, when you are talking with regular ass people on the side of the road on a Tuesday night, those people are not asking for full transparency in every single thing that you do. But uniquely, when you are on the internet, it is expected. Whole cloth. Now, I'm not saying transparency in the sense that you should be held accountable for your actions. That goes without saying. On any internet platform, hell, even in real life, we expect that. No, the Society of Transparency is the one that the idea is basically that we are all voyeurs in some way, shape, or form, right? So if I go out into the real world and I meet a cute dog, I'm very likely to take a picture of that dog. Now, 10 or 20 years ago, that picture would go up on my wall and I would be like, yeah, that was a good memory. But later on in life, nowadays, the expectancy is that that picture is going to go up on the internet for everybody to see. And eventually this picture gets painted for everyone of what life looks like for me, what life looks like for the average person. This creates a myriad of problems. First of all, for content creators, it becomes a parasocial issue. People who are viewers of mine, there are some of you who legitimately believe that y'all are my friends, despite the fact that we have never had a conversation. Now, you may not believe this in your, logical cortex, your frontal lobe, but subconsciously, there is a familiarity there. There is something there with me and several people in my audience, and this is called a parasocial relationship. This is what happens when, despite me not knowing whether or not you exist at all, you know a breadth of information about me. You know that I'm 32. You know that I have used a VTuber model before and will use one in the future for various projects. You know that my house has been under repair multiple times. You know that I struggle with financial issues. You know that I struggle with impulse control. You know that one of my favorite games is Magic the Gathering. You know that one of my favorite franchises is Sonic the Hedgehog. You know my preference in women. You know my struggles with religiosity when I was little. Like, you know all of these aspects about my life, things that most people, when I sit down and talk to people every single day, people are my friends, may or may not actually be privy to. This is that paradox. This is that idea of a society of transparency, where there are so many aspects of my life, so many little nuggets of my life that are strewn around on the internet that anybody who's watched enough of my content might actually know more about me than some of my actual friends know. And that is the case for every single content creator. That is the case for everybody on the internet. We put so much of ourselves out on the internet. Now, this creates an interesting scenario, right? Those of us who get to be supremely anonymous on the internet, who make that our goal, tend to be in the situation where we get to hold other people far more accountable for their actions, because whatever skeletons we might have in our closet aren't out there for the public to see. So now you get people who are willing to be far more vitriolic online, especially from anonymous accounts, than other people would be, like than regular Joe Schmoes would be outside. People are far more willing on the internet to take you to task for various things, right? Let's say, for instance, that you go to an ice cream shop and somebody in your comments who happens to be a vegan disagrees with that. Now, What if their friends come and see that thing? What if they're an influencer? Now suddenly this menial decision, this basic ass decision to go get an ice cream cone has been blown up to thousands of people on the internet. This is not normal behavior, but it does happen online. It happens enough to be rather weird. And the weird thing is, people are attracted to negativity. This is one of the reasons why the media, just legacy media, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, this is the reason why the media uses the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. When we see something that is hyper negative, we want to tell ourselves in our heart of hearts, that's bad. I would never associate with myself with that. I don't care about that drama stuff. That's not me. But then people lap it up all the time. Why do you think reality TV got as big as it did for as long as it did? People lap up that drama. They lap up that conflict. Now, when they find a content creator who is peddling in conflict all the time, now suddenly those people who aren't about drama, don't like any of that stuff, now suddenly they're listening to all the gossip on the grapevine, whether or not every bit of information out there is true, because that's not the primary concern. The primary concern for multiple of these people is entertainment. First and foremost, this is the thing that they are turning on in the morning while they are going and taking a poop. This is the thing that they are watching while they are cooking their breakfast. This is entertainment for them. Why is this an issue? Well, put it simply, a lot of times we get things like activism in the form of entertainment. A lot of times people feel like they are being part of a solution when all they are doing is watching somebody who is profiting off of the problem. Let me give you an example. Let's go ahead and take somebody like Matt Walsh complaining about BLM. Some conservative watching Matt Walsh feels like on some small level they might be part of the solution against BLM riots back when they were happening far more often. Sorry for the burps. Now the funny thing is, the world where BLM riots are happening happens as a direct result of people like Matt Walsh changing the narrative and painting a negative narrative about black people. This, in turn, affects people's way that they see other black people on the street. And as evidenced by people who I used to be friends with, who watched a lot of people like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh, saying things to me in private like, I just think we get along better with our own kind. The absolute nanosecond that our black, like the one friend we had in our group who was black, wasn't there that day playing Magic the Gathering. Isn't it so weird that that happened, right? That's really fucked up. Now, why does that happen? Well, you get people like Matt Walsh who are saying things like that, and eventually that gets parroted by your random normies around the world, right? So, content creators who peddle in this stuff, who are saying, oh no, we need to solve this problem, oftentimes they don't actually want that problem to be solved because they directly profit from that problem never being solved. The world in which Matt Walsh is constantly painting black people in a negative light, the world in which Matt Walsh is painting trans people in a negative light, the world in which he's painting gay people in a negative light, that world is the one that creates the civil unrest in those communities that he then gets to profit off of bitching about. And now, a regular Joe Schmo who, before a society of transparency, would not have cared about this outside of what was talked about on the news, now suddenly, this person is very invested and very opinionated about this topic. And if they are in an area where they think there are no consequences, or where they are anonymous, again, like the internet, like the internet is a place where we get to be supremely anonymous if we so choose, now suddenly this person gets to have an outlet for those things. Remember that vegan that I talked about? You went to an ice cream cone place, you got an ice cream cone, that vegan that just happened to be a famous influencer said a thing, now suddenly people are dogpiling on it. Well, that happens in every single algorithmic thing. Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, etc. Because these places peddle in conflict, because conflict is engagement, and engagement is views, and views are money. The more conflict, the more often you're revisiting a page, the more often you're seeing advertisers. That's part and parcel to the system. So, These people who, again, prior to this society of transparency, where these parasocial allegiances to, say, people like Matt Walsh were there, where now suddenly they care very, very much about this person's opinion and will peddle that opinion later on the internet. Now suddenly, these people who have been peddled this information get to say, it can be anything here. Let's say trans people are pedophiles. Let's say that's what they're saying on Twitter. Now, one of two things is going to happen. People are going to come in and fight that, because the people who want to disagree with that, and you should disagree with that, people who want to disagree with that are going to be very vocal about it. Nobody wants to let that shit rest. Nobody wants to let that shit just sit there and simmer, right? A lot of us view it as our civic duty to call out that kind of harmful rhetoric when that harmful rhetoric presents itself. So what happens? People get in a fight with that regular Joe Schmo. Now, that fight increases the algorithmic reach of that conversation, of that statement. Now, suddenly, the people who agree with him see the post and start engaging as well. And now, Twitter's algorithm, YouTube's algorithm, Facebook's algorithm, all of these places are going to now be profiting off of this fight. They are incentivized for the fight to continue. They are incentivized to not step in on this because money is being made. There was a Facebook CEO, not Facebook CEO, one of the board members at Facebook mentioned how Facebook, in some way, shape, or form, was directly responsible for there was some like major attack that happened, and the conversations that led to that attack happened on Facebook, and a lack of moderation happened to be the reason why it was allowed to continue to the point where it escalated where it was. I don't remember the exact details. But upon mentioning that, he said that was a bad thing. But we brought people together. But Facebook brought people together. And did it? Did it? It did, technically. More people are able to talk with each other, but realistically, that also means that more people end up fighting each other, and these algorithms profit from that fighting. Social Warlock says the Facebook papers. Okay, cool. I was trying to remember exactly where I remembered that quote being from, but if you remember it as the Facebook paper, Social Warlock, then I'm going to go ahead and assume that you're correct in that, because my memory is very, very spotty. So that's why I stopped doing debates. Anyway. So what happens when you have an algorithm that is built on conflict, when you have a society of transparency where all of these content creators who, as far as your subconscious brain is concerned, are as close to a friend as anybody else you've known, because you might know more about these content creators than you do about your actual friends you've spent years with, because content creators are going to throw this information out there sometimes, depending on how transparent they want to be. Hell, y'all know what I get paid on YouTube and Twitch and Patreon, because all that info is public, and nobody at my card shop knows what I get paid, because it's just not part of a normal conversation there, right? Isn't that strange? So what happens when you have these people primed for conflict, algorithmically incentivized to engage in conflict, content creators who are able to stoke said conflict, and much like if your best friend tried to convince you on a point, you were more likely to listen to those content creators stoking that conflict. What does this soup create? Well, it creates a big giant fucking mess. Now, on the internet, that situation leads to us talking to each other in very snippy terms, very aggressive terms. Take Twitter, for example. If I am on Twitter and I am not paying money for Twitter Blue or whatever the hell it's called now, I am likely to try to truncate every single thing that I say so that I get the point across as fast as possible. Now, when you do that, you will naturally end up being far more candid, because sometimes the way that we have to tiptoe around our words to make them more soft and presentable also ends up making us more verbose. So we end up being far more candid, we end up being far more aggressive, we end up being far more standoffish on places like Twitter. Also, on places like Twitter and Facebook to another degree, we don't have the ability to read tone, right? Take a bunch of people who already are not as socially adept as they might have once been in a world where the only thing they could do was go outside and entertain themselves with other people. Take these people in this boiling soup of conflict and now remove the ability to read tone from any conversation. What are you going to have? Well, you're going to have even more conflict where people who might agree with each other on base things now are talking past each other because there is critical information that is missing, like when somebody's remark is sarcastic, for instance, which is infinitely harder to tell on the internet. If we spend all of our time getting our idea of what a human being is, how we operate with each other from the internet, our opinions are influenced by influencers on YouTube, on Twitch, on Instagram Reels, on TikTok. That is where we are getting our opinions from. Our ideas of friendships are people in Discord servers who, again, we don't have the ability to read tone for, and when we do, it's in a voice chat where we're not face-to-face, so we're still not learning how to read facial expressions. We're still not figuring out how to see what this is saying, how to see what inflections are coming from this and what that might actually say for a conversation. We are not learning that behavior. Now, I understand that there are people with certain neurodivergencies that already make it very, very hard to understand those things. Things like tone, things like concepts like sarcasm, things like facial structure. A lot of people end up being very face blind. It just depends on the situation, but these are certainly exacerbated by a lack of situations where people can learn those skills. Hell, even if you cannot learn the skill in truth, you do have the ability to learn to mimic it. And through that mimicry, you can learn what certain facial expressions do and mean. It is certainly harder, and it's certainly not even going to work for everybody, but it is one option that happens there for people. And there are lots of neurodivergent people in my audience who happen to be extroverts who will say that, yeah, that is what they ended up doing. They learned how certain behaviors act for people, feel for people, how to recognize that in people by mimicking it themselves. But if all of our social interactions are online with this degree of separation, a degree of separation of not seeing the face, a degree of separation of not hearing the voice, a degree of separation of not being able to see, not being able to hear tone, a degree of separation of that person's identity being entirely hidden behind a profile picture, the type of social skills that we develop as people end up exclusively being in that environment of conflict that algorithms want us to have constantly, influenced by people who, again, because of the society of transparency, you feel like you fucking know, but you don't really know. It's a hot, boiling mess. This is one of the reasons why I've tried to make videos about third places. This is why I've tried to talk about going out and talking with people. This is why every single time that I am in a city where people are actively out and about and talking with people and hanging out in the open in places where you could slide yourself into any conversation at all and people are willing to start up a conversation with you instantaneously, I find those places fucking fascinating. Those are the places I want to be. I don't want to be in rural Georgia, but I own a house here and I couldn't afford living anywhere else. But dear God, put me in the middle of Atlanta. Let me go to college at GSU, or let me go up to New York City, and these are places where I feel infinitely more comfortable. Why? People are outside socializing all the fucking time. We are not as atomized. Now, I mentioned this is a lot of the product of the internet. This is not just the product of the internet. This is also a product of urban planning. This one I'm less studied in, so I will be hip-firing a little bit on this, but this lovely thing happens when every single person is atomized from one another. First, let's go ahead and talk about that. What does atomized mean? Let's say that I am in a very population-dense area, like an apartment complex or a city. When I go outside, the likelihood that I'm going to have to interact with my fellow man is pretty high. They're going to be coming out of their house too, doing their morning coffee, checking their mail. If I'm going to work in an actual office building or anything like that, I am likely to interact with people far more often and basically all the time, right? That's going to be my... If instead I'm living in suburbia, where instead of going to get food, you know, from a cart, where everybody is huddled around and conversations are able to start right there, I'm instead in my neighborhood, which sometimes has events that I may or may not have the schedule to do. I don't have the ability to have these organic conversations as easily because most people are going to be spending their time in their house, probably on one of these fucking things, right? Everybody's spending their time in their house. Nobody is talking to another except in these incredibly toxic online spaces with these incredibly parasocial influencers giving them their opinions and them feeling like those opinions are their own when oftentimes they're not. The amount of times I've heard even like video game content creators who are friends of mine tell me that the most agitating thing for them to hear is their fans read their words back to them. Shit that they know they fucking said, right? So these people who are getting their opinions filtered from a screen are getting their like socialization through a Discord server. These people whose abilities to read a social situation deteriorate every single day because of lack of use of these skills, and their proclivity for conflict increasing all the time because they are constantly existing in environments that algorithmically reward these kinds of fights. And you get to see people from your side come in and defend you, and it feels so good. And then you feel so justified when you're having that fight with that person. Then you take that person and you put them out in the real world. Then you take that person and you introduce them to conflict with a regular human being. They've been atomized. They've been in suburbia. They are not really used to this. Now, suddenly, they have a disagreement with another human being. What does it lead to? Oftentimes, it leads to a meltdown. Because the skill of how to navigate these situations has never been developed. How to navigate conflict resolution, de-escalation, these are skills everybody can learn. The way we have to adapt to them is very different. But again, people who are neurodivergent are going to struggle with this insanely more than people who are neurotypical, depending on the flavor of neurodivergency. Because if you have, say, a special interest in human communication, maybe that's not going to end up being the case for you. Maybe it's going to end up being the case that you are actually much better equipped to deal with conflict resolution and de-escalation. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. But I would venture to guess that most of the people, neurotypical or neurodivergent, that have spent most of their times in the Society of Transparency, where they've both had to be very anonymous, but show enough of themselves online to make friends online, and are getting their opinions by influencers, and are in these areas where conflict is making a fucking AI machine go burr and spit out more advertisements for you because you're doing the right thing. These people are uniquely primed to fail at conflict management. Once you go out in the real world, there are going to be people you disagree with all the time. I have noticed this sometimes in my own community. I'm not naming anyone here, obviously, but I'm sure each of you can attest that you've seen this once or twice. Somebody in my community will say, while I'm going over a video, well, who's the bad guy here? Or which one am I supposed to not like? That's not my fucking place to tell you. That is your place to figure out. If you are watching my content, I would hope that you agree with me and you disagree with the person I'm arguing against in a video or whatever, but that's not my place to explain to you, and it should never be my place to explain to you, nor should it be the place of any content creator to explain to you who the bad person in a situation is. Unless, of course, the situation is so, like, hard to parse that that information is necessary. But oftentimes, like Species is saying, it's not even necessarily that there's always a binary. Sometimes, like when I went over the PragerU video yesterday, sometimes the things that are said in there are correct, but it's the context surrounding it that's incorrect. And parsing through that is something that's important to do. But the reason I say that is oftentimes If I say, I have friends who are conservatives, I have friends who are Republicans, and I've seen this in my chat before, somebody will go, how could you be friends with that kind of person? How could you meet that kind of person and not try to change them? Well, because when you go out in the real world, when you go out with regular fucking human beings, when you talk with normal people who did not exist exclusively on the internet, those conversations don't happen as often as you might think. Those disagreements don't come up as often as you might think. Most people, when you're out and about with them in the real world, you're not going to know what their politics are. You're not going to know what their agreements or disagreements are, and most people who have been in these social environments long enough may even be smart enough to know not to start a fucking fight over shit that they might even disagree with. Right? So you go out to eat with a bunch of friends, and one of them may not end up being really okay with trans people, but there's a trans person at the table. Now, while you might think it is my duty here to educate them on why they are wrong and all this, slow your roll. That's the internet person in you speaking. That's the internet person in you telling you what you're supposed to do in this situation. What's likely going to happen instead is that person who is transphobic, but is right now willing to break bread with a trans person, maybe just for the sake of group cohesion, over time, they're going to warm up to that person. That person's going to stop being the T-slur over there, and they're going to start being my friend Joe or my friend Jane. And this weird thing happens. We see it happens with parents all the time. People who were previously bigoted, but engage in exposure therapy with people for a very long time, end up rescinding a lot of those bigotries. It ends up being supremely inconvenient for a parent to maintain bigotry once they feel like their child is gay. Now, this does not happen all the time. Again, I have had friends who've had falling outs because of these conversations or arguments, where they have just left because they decided to say something like, a girl should have kept the ability to have kids instead of a hysterectomy, right? Like, there's these weird situations that will happen often where the friendships do end up deteriorating. But the likelihood that conflict, right? The likelihood that conflict is going to be the thing that is going to bring them around to your side is supremely low. It is very, very low. Everybody on the internet wants to see themselves as this logical bastion of debating prowess. The reality is, most of us are not that good at it. Most of us are not very convincing. Most of us use arguments that are very convincing only to us. Or, to loop back to the original point, that we are touting from a content creator who also thinks about something in a way that is very interesting to them or very convincing to them, but may not be convincing to general audiences. That person in that friend group is going to learn more about trans people by being around that trans person than by being forced to read through a bunch of medical research that they're probably never going to touch, right? That person is going to be served far better by multiple people around them developing the social skills necessary to have a diverse and mixed friend group with lots of different opinions in there, where everybody will start understanding where everybody else is coming from. When I say that a lot of Republicans don't know any better, aren't actually evil, are just using the political ideology that their parents had and what's been reinforced to them around their rural area, I'm not saying that because some schmuck on the internet told me that. I'm saying that because that's what I see when I sit down and I have a conversation with one of them at a bar. I can tell when somebody's gotten their information from an online personality like an Alex Jones or a Nick Fuentes versus when they've got their information because that's just what everybody was talking about on the other Tuesday. There's a big difference in how those people talk about their information. And the way you have to approach each of those people is going to end up being far different depending on the situation. You're never going to know how to approach those situations if all you're doing is parroting something that an influencer told you. Like me! If all you're doing is parroting something that I told you, that's not gonna help you convince anybody for the most part. It may convince one or two people, but by and large, exposure is going to convince more people that it's okay to be around a socialist or a communist or a trans person or a gay person, or God forbid, they might realize, oh, I've actually had a whole bunch of racist thoughts, but also didn't think I was racist. This shit happens, but for a lot of people it happens slowly. But the internet has poisoned us. The internet has made us far more likely to engage in conflict and use flippant language, be incredibly candid instead of saying something in a way that makes far more sense for a normal fucking human being. You're going to end up getting more people to become better people by exposing them to other better people and just treating them like a human being. But the internet doesn't work that way. The internet wants you to treat everything like a fight, because when everything's a fight, the advertisers get paid more. The videos that I do that talk about more famous people tend to do better. That's just how the algorithm works. It's how the internet works, and it's how it's worked for a while now. And the scariest thing is there are people being born right now who've grown up exclusively in that culture. Who've grown up exclusively in this culture of conflict. That's terrifying. That is an absolutely terrifying thought process to me. Once upon a time, the only time we got to see these kind of racial slurs threw around all the time was on Xbox Live. And at that point, it was kind of just a unique aspect of Xbox Live. Now it's everywhere. Now it's every single aspect of the internet. I don't have to go to a Chan board to find a Nazi. I can just go to Twitter. I don't have to go in a time machine and listen to some 12-year-old telling me how he's going to fuck my mom to hear somebody being misogynist on the internet right now. I can just go to YouTube. Anyway, that's all where that is. I needed to rant about that. I'm gonna be honest. The ways in which our social environments shape us is something that I have been more and more interested in as things have gone on. And as Saki and I have been playing more Pokemon Go and going out and talking with random fucking people that are playing the game, people that I would have never interacted with before, it gets me thinking more about how we should be operating around one another versus how the internet wants us to operate around one another. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here.
Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.